Breaking news right now, the unprecedented chaos on the U.S. southern border, the logistical mess, the apparent lack of compassion, questions about human rights, legality, and political finger pointing. All of that has to wait for a moment because we're seeing something far more urgent right now. Children at an enormous migrant shelter in Texas, some of these kids as young as 10 years old, they're able to walk out of that shelter without being stopped. It happened this weekend here in Brownsville, Texas. A boy, 15 years old, we're told he is alive and well, but now back in Mexico. For many hours, his location and condition were not known. He slipped through the cracks. We got this statement from the shelter called Casa Padre. As a licensed child care center, if a child attempts to leave any of our facilities, we cannot restrain them. We are not a detention center. We talk to them and try to get them to stay. And if they leave the property, we call law enforcement. A 15-year-old boy left the Casa Padre Child Care Center in Brownsville today. We called local law enforcement and continue to work with them. CNN's Polo Sandoval is in South Texas. Polo, tell us what we know about this boy and how surprising is it to learn that this shelter, this children's center, is not allowed to prevent kids from just walking out.
It certainly is surprising, Anna. Of course, you covered much of what we know at this point, that this 15-year-old child walked off this location in Brownsville, Texas, about 50 miles east of where we are at this Border Patrol location in McAllen, Texas. What we know is this 15-year-old walked off that premises. And as you heard from that statement from the owner and operator of this child care facility, they are not authorized by the state of Texas to hold children against their will. They cannot even put their hands on them. The only thing that they can do, according to some of the sources we've been speaking to, familiar with, at least with knowledge of the situation, is walk with these children to the property line, ask them that they remain on the premises, but once they make it past that line, then law enforcement has to get called in. I spoke to a member of the Brownsville Police Department who told me that that's exactly what happened. At about 4:30 yesterday afternoon, they received a phone call calling officers to that Southwest Key location in Brownsville, Texas, to reports of a missing 15-year-old boy. We now know that that is a 15-year-old child from Honduras who was at that location that is now, as you just said, in Mexico. And we do understand, based on information from sources close to this investigation and knowledgeable, with knowledge of what happened there, that this child now is in contact with relatives and in the process of returning back to his native Honduras. This is happening as many questions are being asked about what procedures are in place to try to get these children back with their parents. Today, Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren, the latest Democratic lawmaker to visit locations along the border, including this facility here in McAllen, Texas. This is what she told reporters as she, after she walked into this place and saw for herself the conditions that these children are being kept in right now.
There are children by themselves. I saw a 6-month-old baby. Little girls, little boys. There are mothers with their babies and with small children. Family units are together if it's a very small child, but little girls who are 12 years old are taken away from the rest of their families and held separately, or little boys. And they're all on concrete floors in cages. There's just no other way to describe it.
Senator Warren, again, just the latest lawmaker to add her voice to the chorus of Democratic critics about President Trump's zero-tolerance policy that at one point called for the separation of these children from their parents so that moms and dads in the country illegally could go and face criminal charges for illegal entry. Obviously, the executive order from last week put a stop to that separation. However, there are still hundreds, really thousands of children still in the system, and now the U.S. government, mainly the Department of Health and Human Service, are tasked with caring for these children. So now the question, especially in light of yesterday's events in Brownsville when a 15-year-old child left the premises, the questions now will certainly be what kind of protocols should be in place to make sure that those children do not wander away from the facilities, because as Southwest Key points out in that statement that was released earlier, they are not a detention facility, and they are only they can only do what they have been certified by the various regulating agencies to do, which is simply care for these children and not force them to remain at those facilities. Anna.
All right, Polo Sandoval in McAllen, Texas. Thank you. The Trump administration is now detailing at least part of its plan for reuniting the thousands of families it separated at the border, but it won't happen quickly. Here's what we do know from the Department of Homeland Security. When immigrant families first cross the border, they are detained by Customs and Border Protection. Now, parents are then taken into ICE custody, and children are turned over to the Department of Health and Human Services. 522 kids so far have been reunited with parents or guardians. Still, more than 2,000 others remain with HHS. In some cases, children and adults won't be reunited at all if the relationship between parent or child can't be proven, or if the adult is considered a threat to the child's safety or is a criminal undocumented immigrant. The media hasn't been allowed to film inside those centers where these children are being held. Even lawmakers have had trouble getting access at times. In fact, Democrats refused to leave a center in New Jersey last weekend after being denied access there. They protested, they banged on the glass until officials relented and let them inside. Watch.
Yes, we do. You don't have permission to do that.
Members of Congress were entitled to do this.
This is America. This isn't Moscow.
Joining me now, one of those outraged lawmakers you just saw in that video, New York Congressman Adriano Espaillat, a trailblazer, one of the very first former undocumented immigrants elected to Congress. Congressman, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for
being
having me
here.
today.
Obviously, this is an issue that is personal to you in many
Very
ways.
much so, yes.
Do you feel like since we saw you in that video there, in a week's time, things have improved?
Well, at least the Trump administration has now begun to backpedal on this zero tolerance policy that has led to so much hurt and grief among families and the nation. The nation, I think, is traumatized to hear that 9-month-old babies are being split from their moms, that children are being split from their parents, and weeks later, the parents don't know where these children are. They haven't spoken to them. So this is a human rights crisis that's developed in America, and even international entities such as the United Nations and Amnesty International, the Catholic Conference of Bishops, and Human Rights Watch have really expressed concern about the zero tolerance policy that have brought so much hurt. But we're glad that 500 and plus kids are back with their family members, their parents, but there's still several thousand that are not. And the New York Times reported today that many parents have been deported and haven't been able to get back in touch with their children or gotten back with them. So this is the real issue.
They've been deported without their children.
Without their children.
Although I will point out in the DHS fact sheet that they put out regarding these reunifications, they say in the past, many parents have elected to be removed without their children. This is according to ICE.
Well, we don't know what to believe from ICE. There's been so much lies perpetrated to the American people that we just don't trust anybody anymore. And so that's why I went to visit those fathers in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and this Friday I went to visit some of those children that are at the Cayuga Center here in East Harlem in New York. We have over 200 children there that have been separated from their families, have been flown from Texas, from Arizona, from California, thousands of miles, and now they're in New York City. They're doing a tremendous job there. I think that they're trying the best way they can to connect them with their family members, but it's just so hard to do so. So this administration has really wreaked havoc on the American public.
Did you have a chance to speak with some of those children in that detention center, and what was your big takeaway?
Well, I saw the children, these children have some level of resilience in them, but obviously they must be traumatized. They've been split from their parents. I spoke to some of the foster care parents. I really like what they said. That some of them have 6 and 7 children in their home. It's not just really about taking care of them. They're really invested. New Yorkers have stepped up. And I think they will continue to step up to provide help for these children. I'm very proud of New York. I'm proud of this country. It's because of the American people that the Trump administration has pulled back on this.
I wonder if you had any flashbacks or memories of your time visiting with those children who were being held there, who had just crossed the border. If you remembered what it was like to be that 9-year-old boy who came to America from the Dominican Republic with your parents.
I saw a little boy that must have been about 9 years old, and I gave him a high five, and he gave me a high five, and he smiled at me, and it just broke my heart.
Broke your heart? Why?
Broke my heart. Just to see them there away from their parents, I just would have wondered what would have been like for me to be without my parents.
It did take you back then. There are still a lot of questions about the reunification process as we've been discussing. We talked a little bit about the plan as we know it. Here's what your Republican colleague in the Senate, Senator James Lankford, said today about this plan.
We do. Let me clarify this. We know where every single child is. This is an issue that's gone out there somewhat in some of the other media that's not been responsible for this, with the assumption that the administration's lost track of that.
Congressman, is that your understanding as well, that the Trump administration does in fact know where every single child is?
This is like an Abbott and Costello movie. I think that the senator is saying that, but obviously these parents don't know. The men that I met with that was separated from their children didn't know where their children
They didn't know
now,
where their children
government has split them. They should have some level of records that show which child is where, which parent is where. But the parents didn't know. Some of these children bring little notes attached with a safety pin in their clothing with names and phone numbers, and so these folks that are working with them are trying hard to connect with these folks that these names are and these phone numbers, but there's no guarantee that everybody knows where their children are or have they spoken to them. I think that's false. The government may know, but they're not sharing that information.
We do know that some of these children have tracking bracelets or some kind of barcodes, as we've seen in the pictures of children who are held at least some of these housing facilities, but it also makes you wonder if the administration knows who and where their parents are. Even if they know where the children are, do they know whose children
Why
they are?
would the administration accept to deport a parent without first confirming whether or not that parent may want to take their child back with them? How come there are parents that have been deported and their children in here, and those parents have not been able to speak with those children, as the New York Times reported today, have not been able to reunite with those children?
So you're concerned about that. I also want to get your thoughts on the statement from the president today. He writes on Twitter, "We cannot allow all of these people to invade our country. When somebody comes in, we must immediately, with no judges or court cases, bring them back from where they came." What's your reaction?
Anytime anybody says these people, I'm very concerned about that term. It's almost singularly a very aggressive term to try to divide America. These are people that are just coming to the United States because they're in fear. They're asylum seekers. We have a long-standing tradition in our nation to open our doors to asylum seekers. We're not even listening to their story. We are arresting them and splitting their families. Traditionally, when you seek asylum, you will be given an opportunity to go before a judge and say, how come you wanted to stay in the United States? Because maybe your life was in danger. Some of the men that I spoke to, the stories that they told me that I cannot share here, clearly their life was in danger. They ran away from an imminent danger for them and their children. One of them felt very much strongly that his daughter may be hurt just as bad as one of his business partners was hurt. So clearly these folks are running away from danger and death. And our nation has traditionally opened the doors to people like that. And now we're not doing that. That's a sign of trouble for America. Maybe we're heading in the wrong direction.
Realistically, though, can the U.S. afford to accept every single immigrant who wants to come to this country, or does there need to be some kind of a limit, and what is that?
Well, there should be a due process for this, that they should be, once you step foot in the United States, you may not have all the rights and privileges that the Constitution offers every single American or green card holders, but there's a due process that's extended to you to give you some rights. You have to go before a judge. I hear that these proceedings in the courts are for 50 and 60 people at a time. Unheard of. Massive court proceedings where everybody's heard at one time and everybody's deported without extending to those people the singular opportunity to hear their story and to find out maybe that they're sending them back to death.
Adriano Espaillat, thank you so much, Congressman, for being here with us.
Thank you.